what does a healthy life look like to you?
So this one I think also has probably evolved and just become a little bit more broad, where to me, I think a healthy life looks like being able to fully live out the purpose that I'm here on this earth for, of which I said I don't fully know or understand at this moment, but fully living out that purpose in an uninhibited way. So uninhibited by my physical health, my mental health, that I am just able to fully be myself and express that purpose in the world without any inhibitions.
Hello, and welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm Dr. Julie Fouché, family physician and former CrossFit Games athlete. Here, I bring you information and inspiration to help bridge the gap between fitness and medicine and support your journey toward your healthiest self. Thank you so much for joining me. Now let's get started with this week's episode.
Welcome back to the Pursuing Health podcast. I am very excited for this special episode. This is the 300th episode of the podcast, which is really crazy to think about, that I first started it about 9 years ago, and now we're 300 episodes in. And so in order to celebrate, I have a very special guest here today, Nicole Carroll. She is the Chief Brand Officer of CrossFit and was a guest way back when on episode 58 of the podcast. So it's been a while since she's been with us, but I am so honored that she has decided to join me, and we're flipping the script a little bit today. So I'm going to be answering questions submitted by listeners, and Nicole is going to be interviewing me. So a little bit less comfortable for me because now I'm in the hot seat, but I'm excited to dive in, and you guys asked some great questions. So I will give you the floor, Nicole. Thank you for joining me.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I can't believe it's been 9 years. But congratulations.
Isn't that crazy?
Congratulations on the 300th episode. And thank you so much for asking me to do this, especially because I think one of my least favorite things in the world is to be interviewed and asked a bunch of questions. So when you asked me to be on your podcast to ask you the questions, I was like, oh, now I think I can do that. So
that's a little different, right? It's a little more comfortable. So I can appreciate that now sitting on this side. And so cool. You said like 9 years is crazy to think about, but I was also thinking back to when we first met, it's been 14 years because it was right after my last event at the 2010 CrossFit Games that I first was introduced to you. And that's crazy to think about, even that it's been so long, this journey has been so long, 15 years since I started CrossFit. So, and for you, even longer, but it's just really cool to be doing this together.
Yeah, it really is. And your listeners, really cool questions. And so I think I'm just going to kick off with the first one. And it's really related to what we're talking about now, because it starts with just about the podcast. And the question is about just if you could share some reflections from when you started the podcast and your initial intent with it to where it is now, and sort of maybe how that has both been fulfilled and or kind of evolved over time.
I love this question because it gave me a chance to reflect a bit. And I feel like this podcast has evolved as I've evolved. And it's been a really cool way just to bring others along my own journey of evolution and growth as we all are on, as we grow and become older and wiser. But the podcast actually started, I don't know if I've ever shared this story on the podcast of how it started. It was a cool kind of confluence of events where I had I knew I was finishing my CrossFit Games career. It was 2015. So I knew it was my last season. I was trying to think of how can I stay in touch with the community. I was very shy at the time. Like starting podcasts sounded very scary to me. I had started a blog and had put up only a few entries because I always wanted to make them perfect before I was ready to publish. But I had attended a Tony Robbins seminar. This was it was during the Open. Actually, now looking back, it was with my significant other. At the time, we were just friends, but we had attended this Tony Robbins seminar. So I was all pumped up. And then I had lunch with Mo Nakvi, who I know you know as well, who's one of the founders of Beyond the Whiteboard. And he really just inspired me and kind of pushed me. He said, why don't you start a podcast? And I was so pumped up from being at this Tony Robbins seminar that I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And he agreed to help me. And so Beyond the Whiteboard actually helped me put the podcast together. They helped produce it for the first several years. And it really brought me out of my comfort zone. I remember being so nervous in those first few episodes. And at the beginning, it was so much about, my world at the time, which was fitness and competition in CrossFit. So I interviewed a lot of fellow athletes. I interviewed a lot of coaches. It was very focused on that aspect of CrossFit. And then as I evolved, I progressed in medical school and residency, and it became more broad and more general health focused. And I think over the last 4 years or so, it's also accompanied me on my own personal journey and evolution in working with patients, where it's encompassing even more of the mental, emotional, spiritual sides of health too. So I'm so grateful for the people who followed along this far. I'm sure I've lost people who were really more interested in the competition aspect, but it has been a great expression of my own journey. And I'm so grateful for people who have enjoyed coming alongside me.
Yeah, what a cool thing for people to be able to follow your evolution, right with you. I mean, I just think that's awesome. And I also think it's awesome for somebody who also struggles with perfectionism and things needing to be perfect before we put ourselves out there, just how much of a probably feat it's been to do what you've done, and how comfortable you've gotten with it, and just how cool it is to see that, and inspiring for me to see that. So I don't want to take up all the time talking
No,
myself.
it's been a cool, yeah, I totally agree. It's been such a cool format for me because unlike a blog post or unlike, something that you can continue to tweak, it is very raw. It's a conversation in the moment, and sure, you could edit it, but it's really helped me become more comfortable with that and just, being able to have real conversations and share them. And that's been what's been so rewarding for me. And really the motivation behind it was I had met so many amazing people through my CrossFit Games career, and I wanted to be able to share what I learned and share those people's stories and expertise and experience with a larger audience. And so, yeah, it's definitely helped me get out of my own way a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, this is another good one. Ready?
Ready.
Since starting the podcast, how has the meaning of health and your outlook on the pursuit of health changed? And how has this changed the way you live and practice medicine?
Mm-hmm.
Harder.
This is a big one. So I think I've grown into such a broader understanding of health than I think I had at the beginning. And it's all through my own experience and my experience working with patients. But I think that initially kind of speaking to the perfectionism piece, I felt like, okay, I have this insider knowledge that a lot of people in healthcare don't have, that really, if we just, live a healthy lifestyle, we'll prevent most disease, which is true. But I think I was approaching it in a way where the intention behind it was very much from that perfectionist type of intention. Like, okay, I have to eat perfectly. I have to do the perfect exercise. I have to sleep the perfect number of hours, meditate a certain number of minutes every day. And there, while there's still a lot of benefit to doing that, I've come to understand that actually there's another layer that comes underneath that is really important for our health, which is our emotional health, I kind of put them all together, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, which is a lot of taking care of our hearts, taking care of the intention behind we're doing what we're doing. Are we trying to perfect all of these things in the health arena because we are insecure, because we are trying to run away from something, because we think we're not good enough? Or is it because we truly just love ourselves and want to see ourselves express the best version of ourselves. And there's a very different intention behind those. And we see that expressed differently than in health in various ways. And I came to this from my own experience because realizing that, okay, I'm trying to perfect everything. This isn't working, and having some big sort of wake up calls and changes in my own life, and being sort of met right in front of me with some of these emotional and mental and spiritual questions that I started searching for. But also working with my patients. I see there's a lot of patients I work with who, are doing all the right things, quote unquote, and following the formula, but are still experiencing symptoms and still experiencing health problems. And oftentimes when we go down that route of mental, emotional, spiritual is when we finally start to see more holistic healing.
Yeah. 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 That's something that started to really resonate with me too, especially as I get older. And you just start recognizing some of the things you were doing aren't working as well, and digging a little bit deeper as to why. And yeah, the interconnectedness there is on one hand kind of like a big duh, but on another hand, I think something that the fitness industry can often really, I don't know, downplay, I think, sometimes to people's detriments. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I
that's really
totally
cool.
agree. And I think that, marketing a lot of times is based in fear. And so
Yeah,
when you can appeal to people's fears or their, concerns of I'm not good enough or I have to do this or that to be worthy, it's powerful.
yeah,
And there's a lot of science behind this too. There's a whole field of study called psychoneuroimmunology, and it studies how our psychology, how we interpret, the world and why, the way things are happening impacts our neurology, our nervous system, our hormones, our immune system, and, how our thoughts can impact a state of chronic stress, independent of all the other healthy things that we're doing.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I'd love to dig in more to that, but
All of these things, the questions were so good. I feel like I could do
I
a whole
know.
episode on all of them.
Okay. Next question. What have been some of the most impactful and or memorable guests or moments or discussions that you've had on the podcast?
So it is hard to pick because, I hate picking favorites, and every conversation has been unique and impactful in its own way. I think kind of speaking to this evolution, when I think about the ones that sit with me, it's actually on these topics that have really moved my thinking forward. So, for example, I had a conversation with Dr. George Slavich, who's the director of the UCLA Stress Lab. It's probably been 4 years now. And he talked about this psychoneuroimmunology and what's happening on a, biochemical level when we are feeling, stressful thoughts, and what happens when that is chronically activated, and how that then, started to shift my thinking and my areas of interest. I think about more recently last year, I interviewed a woman named Dr. Lisa Miller, who is a teacher at Columbia University, and she studies the impact of basically the science of spirituality. And she studies the links between depression, spirituality, and depression. And her research is fascinating. And so it once again opened my mind. And we connected a lot with, the spiritual aspects of CrossFit and why that is so good for people and so healing for people. And so conversations like that have really, I leave some of these conversations just feeling this intense feeling of like, wow, this is truth, that connecting with this truth coming forward, and something that I want to learn more about, and something I'm curious about, and that I want to evolve my own thinking. Those are the conversations that I think I look back on and I'm the most grateful for.
Yeah, what a very cool thing to be kind of learning right along with the people listening. And then, that being a jumping off point for you to continue kind of giving to help people learn. And I just think that's a really it's a really neat thing. It's a really cool thing about podcasts in general, I think, or hosting a podcast is just that kind of like collaborative learning where you're doing it together, like yourself and your listeners. That's just a really cool thing.
Absolutely. I am no expert in, most of these topics, but I enjoy learning and connecting with people and then sharing that. So that's the approach I've tried to take.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to some nutrition and I think nutrition and recovery questions that we have. So the first one here is, what are some tips to get better quality sleep and enhance recovery, or to enhance recovery? Better quality sleep to enhance recovery. I'm
Great
super curious
question.
about this one too.
Yes. So there's so many aspects to this, and there's so much information, thank goodness, now out there about sleep, and there's more sleep research. But I think that there's the basics, right? Like your sleep environment, making sure that you're taking care of those, that you're in a dark room or you have an eye mask so that you're not going to be affected if the sun comes up and you're still needing to sleep. Quiet. Oftentimes people have challenges with this if you have young kids around or animals around, but trying to keep a quiet sleep environment. And then the temperature is actually really important too, because it's more so the temperature that signals our body that it's time to sleep even than light. So having a cooler temperature. From there is, I think, the things that I've noticed a big impact on myself. Let's see, would be the timing of food. So food intake timing. This is all around circadian rhythm. So making sure for me that I know if I don't eat within 3 hours of bedtime, I'm going to usually have better sleep, better quality sleep. And same thing with timing of light exposure. So I find if I'm in a natural environment and the sun goes down and I don't go into a space with a lot of artificial lights, I naturally get sleepy and want to fall asleep. But if I'm at home and I have all the lights on in the house, then it becomes more difficult. So trying to go with that natural rhythm of the sunlight, and then getting the sunlight first thing in the morning too, to train your circadian rhythm that, okay, it's time to be awake. It's so incredible how powerful our circadian rhythms are. And I've had, I notice it myself, but I've also had several patients who start training their circadian rhythm with light exposure like this, getting some sunlight first thing in the morning. And a lot of symptoms start to improve, mood improves, energy improves. So it's a very underestimated resource. And then there's substances. So caffeine, obviously making sure you're not having caffeine too late so that it affects your sleep. Alcohol is a big one. I know the number of people that have reduced their alcohol intake after tracking some of their sleep metrics is pretty remarkable to me once you actually see that data, because it can fool you that, oh, I feel like I'm sleeping pretty well. But once you see the impact that it has on some of your sleep metrics, and then really notice the difference when you're not drinking alcohol as much. A lot of people have reduced their intake that I've worked with. And then the wind down routine. So aside from all these other environmental factors, there's something about having a routine where instead of just going straight from our computers or the TV into bed, that there's some ritual around, whether it's drinking tea or whether it's taking a bath or reading a book or doing something to shift your body into more of that relaxation state before sleep.
Yeah.
So those are my quick hitters.
Yeah. So dark room, cool room, not eating too close to bedtime, reducing alcohol intake, sunlight first thing. And that means like actually getting outside, not just through the window type of, I'm sitting at my computer, but I've got a big window in front of me because I have
Totally.
No, I actually like to go outside.
Go outside. Yeah. Even better if you can, get your feet in the grass or walk around or do something like that.
Yeah. And then just some routine to kind of trigger your mind and body that like, okay, we're going into a different state now. Okay.
Yeah, which is sometimes easier said than done, especially with the phones we all live with. So, but I encourage everyone to try it if you haven't yet. Challenge yourself to, plug the phone in another room and be off of it an hour or so before bedtime
Yeah.
and see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Hi, this question's about mindset and stress management. And then what are top approaches you use for your patients in this realm that are tangible? And do you have any personal favorite aha moments to lower your own stress or change your own mindset?
So this is another question that I could do a whole episode on, because I have tried all of the tools myself, and I think, I don't want to say all, I've tried many tools myself, and I work with these things with a lot of my patients. And so I'll share just a couple. I think for me, one of the things that has had the biggest impact is meditation, and there are many ways to approach that, or mindfulness, or many ways to approach that, and it's about experimenting and figuring out what works best for you. I think that a couple of tools that have had a huge impact for me, where I've noticed in the moment big shifts, there's a tool called emotional freedom technique, or tapping. I've actually done an episode on this before with Nick Ortner, walking people through, but that's been one that's been really impactful. And then there's a quick, you think about cognitive behavior therapy, which is one of the most widely used tools for sort of thought work and managing the way our thoughts impact our emotions. And so there's plenty of tools there, but there's one specific tool that's not necessarily part of CBT, but kind of a similar concept that has been popularized by a woman named Byron Katie. And so she calls it the work. So I'll share that one because it's had a big impact on me. So it's 4 questions you ask yourself anytime that you have a thought that is impacting your emotions, maybe in a negative way, causing you stress. It's something that you're getting stuck on. So let's say I just took a test and I got a bad grade on it. I got a C on it. And so I start having a thought like, I'm a failure, right? So the first question you ask yourself is it true? And I might convince myself in that moment that, yes, this is true. Like, I am a failure. I did so bad on this test. I think that means I'm a failure. But the next question is, can you absolutely know it's true? So you have to ask yourself this again. And rarely, or if ever, I've never come across a thought where I can absolutely know that it's true. And so to that one, I would probably have to say, okay, I guess that's a no. So then you ask yourself, how do you react when you believe that thought? And when I tell myself I'm a failure, I feel really bad, right? Maybe my heart rate starts increasing. I start to feel really tense. I feel, upset. And then you ask yourself, question number 4 is, who would you be without the thought? And if I never thought I was a failure, I would probably feel pretty free. I would feel pretty happy, confident, a lot better feelings, or more pleasant feelings. And then the last step is to turn the thought around. So to come up with opposites of, maybe that thought isn't true. Maybe the opposite is true. So I could actually turn it around to say, I actually have done had a lot of successes in life, and think about some examples of things that I've done that have been successful. Or maybe instead of I am a failure, it's that I didn't do very well on this test. But that doesn't mean that I personally am a failure. So coming up with ways to turn that thought around. And that has been something that's been incredibly impactful for me in starting to unpack some of even the automatic thoughts that I was having that I wasn't even really aware of.
Right. Yeah. And that caused stress, and that you're not even aware that that's causing stress until you start that process of, wait a minute, like, I'm actually upset right now. Where's that coming from? I'm creating all of this, and maybe the stories we tell ourselves. And then I love those questions. I'm familiar with Byron Katie too, and I've done some of her worksheets.
Cool.
And it is amazing how tricky our minds can be when it comes to the negative stories that we can tell ourselves. And
Totally.
just the simple way that she kind of forces you to walk through it and recognize, wow, I don't have any more proof for this story than I do for positive story. And actually, maybe I actually have more evidence for
for the
for,
positive one.
for something more positive.
Totally.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
It is. And maybe I should have used a more applicable example for CrossFit. It could be some story like I'm walking around the gym before the workout starts. You often hear people say like, "Oh, this is going to be awful," or "I'm going to do so bad in this workout." And if you pick that apart and you just say, "Well, I wonder if we change these to more positive stories, the impact that would have." And how many of us are walking around. I was so unaware of it for so long that these thoughts automatically happening. And then, like you said, automatically triggering the stress response sort of 24/7.
Yeah. It's wild. It really is. And sometimes we can think like sometimes I think, or, I can think like, oh, well, this is how I'm feeling right now. I don't want to, sugarcoat it but then you really start digging in and recognize that there's maybe something even just autopilot about it. Like maybe it isn't even how you're really feeling, like
Totally. Yes. And this is such, oh my gosh. Yeah.
maybe
Such a
like, I don't
hard,
know, safety or protective,
yeah,
mechanisms that we have. So yeah, it's
totally.
fascinating.
And such a hard thing to tease out, right? Because so much of, as I've gone down this path of emotional health and understanding, there is a sense that I want to make sure that I'm allowing myself to feel all of the emotions, right? And
Yeah.
not keeping them bottled up as maybe I had before. But then also recognizing when am I perpetuating a negative thought emotion loop that I can intervene on, right? Like we want to
Yeah.
feel all the negative emotions, but then am I just bringing on a new one by continuing with this negative thought pattern?
Right. Yeah. Very cool.
Oh, this is great. We're going deep. I love it.
We're going to shift gears in a big way on this next question now.
Okay. We're
We're going
coming
to
up
talk
for
about
air.
energy drinks. And do you feel like energy drinks have a place in the diet of an athlete?
This is a good one. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but I would say in general, any kind of fake processed food probably is not the best fuel for an athlete. And I think with energy drinks, like any kind of processed food, there's so much marketing. There's often so many extra ingredients that don't add nutritional or performance value. And so I have to question whether those are necessary or helpful. I know there are many, there's a whole spectrum of energy drinks. There are some that have many, processed ingredients, and there's others that are marketed as being more healthier, more natural. I think that, at the end of the day, when you think about substances that can play a role in athletic performance, there's very few that are very clean and well studied. Things like caffeine, things like beta alanine, and so even when people ask me about pre-workout, I'm often saying, well, why don't you use caffeine? Why don't you use just a plain beta alanine supplement, something that's very clean and been well studied to show performance improvement, as opposed to a lot of times, drinks that have a whole mix of things in them. But that's my that's my initial reaction.
Yeah, I think I have very similar reaction. It's always hard for me to be prescriptive when it comes to really, really people seeking really high performance, and especially like in the moment type of competition, or, my general sense of them is if that's your priority and that's what, you've discovered in whatever way is going to work in that moment where you potentially prioritizing performance over long-term health, or just a short-term gain over something longer term. That's always my caveat, but otherwise I think I have really similar feelings to you. And personally, my experience with them, I haven't had one in many, many years. So certainly it could have just been the type and the whatever, but like I did not like what it did to my mental and emotional state once, like kind of on the come down of it was really, really noticeably negative for me. So I've just never never would feel comfortable recommending them, and I don't, I'll drink lots of cups of coffee. So,
Right. Right.
so, I mean,
Caffeine is one
like,
of the most
yeah,
powerful. Right.
yeah, but I do
And
think sort of the process nature of them definitely makes me real hesitant to recommend them.
but I think you made a great point going back to past episodes that have shifted my thinking. I've interviewed Dr. Wayne Jonas a couple of times, and he has done a lot of research on what people think about as a placebo effect, but he calls it the meaning response, where there's a lot that happens just based on your expectation. Like if you have this expectation, I'm going to drink this energy drink and I'm going to feel better and I'm going to perform better, then regardless of what's in it, you probably will. And so there's some aspect to that, right? Especially with someone who's a higher level athlete, that if that's sort of your go-to and you think that's helping you and it's going to, you've done it, then I'm sure there's some value in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. This next one is, do you recommend the nutrition course that CrossFit offers?
All right. Well, convenient that we have you here to share
Yeah.
with us, because of course I recommend it. And I was so grateful to be included in helping to create that course. And I also would love for you to share, because there's been some recent new offerings for healthcare professionals specifically. And so I would love for you to share just a little bit about what's out there now that people should know about and should be considering signing up for.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'd love to talk about that because we launched two things. One is we launched a one-day course for healthcare professionals, so physicians and healthcare professionals. It's just a one-day kind of introduction to CrossFit, but then we've also partnered with some of our like MDL2s that have MDL1s, MDL2s that have sort of been with CrossFit and CrossFit Health from the very beginning to contribute to the curriculum and the content of that course. And so some of it, and eventually we'd like to bring them in to teach parts of the course that are about kind of integrating CrossFit more into your practice, if that's something that interests you, right? Or even connecting with affiliates or referring out to affiliates and things like that. If for lifestyle, right? Lifestyle intervention. And then also the other thing that we just launched was the CrossFit Medical Society, which is a way that we can start really formalizing that relationship between physicians and healthcare providers and affiliates and coaches much more for the benefit of the member or the benefit of the patient. And so we just kicked that off, and we're kicking that off right now with a directory. So healthcare professionals who become members and have their L1 or have their HCP one day, they can be listed in this directory where CrossFitters, coaches, affiliates, et cetera, can kind of find providers who are supportive of CrossFit, looking for ways to kind of address root cause of chronic conditions. Um, and yeah, and then eventually what we'd like to see that turn into is something a lot more formalized where the medical society then, we're also going to partner with them to create more education for affiliates so that there can be kind of this really more like bi-directional, like confident, right, mutually beneficial and confident referral between healthcare providers and CrossFit affiliates. And yeah, so it's just lots of really exciting stuff to, I think, take something from, like, there'll be a lot of education offered, but then I really love that there's just this really practical element to it where it's a place that people can go and where healthcare professionals and, effectively, I think of CrossFit coaches as health coaches in many ways, right? And certainly, like, I'm really interested in getting more education into the hands of coaches and affiliates around, taking care of special populations and all the things
Yeah.
that make somebody really well equipped to deal with really like anyone on whatever side of the spectrum of kind of that sick, well, fit continuum. And so I'm really excited about that, and about, it's, Dr. Tom McCoy, who is longtime affiliate owner, his business partner, Jennifer Pishko, who's a long 10-year affiliate owner. They're heading it up. And yeah, their vision is really, to kind of create this health ecosystem where there's collaboration between kind of the lifestyle, side of the house with the CrossFit coaches and affiliates, and then with people in the medical field, physicians and healthcare professionals. So we're super excited to be partnering with them and to have just kicked it off. And definitely, if you're interested in learning more, CrossFitMedicalSociety.com is where to go for that. So thanks for asking about that.
Yes. Yes. So exciting. And I hope people will check it out. And it just makes so much sense, right? And it's been a long time coming of how the affiliates are already such centers for health, but how can we even more smoothly connect the like-minded healthcare practitioners of all types with what's happening in the affiliates, bring more people to affiliates, bring more education to trainers. It just makes so much sense. And I think, everyone who does CrossFit would much rather, if they have a medical concern, I would much rather go to a doctor who understands what I do, right? Because I think so many people have experienced that, not being understood or being misinterpreted when they explain that they do CrossFit. So super exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
Yay. Cool.
Yay. Okay. Moving along. This is a cool question. So how do you ground yourself when you lose track with spirituality and direction?
This is a great question. So I think that, and I often feel this way, right? I think when you are sort of pushing yourself and exploring new things and always trying to find the boundaries, there are often times where maybe you feel overwhelmed, or maybe you feel like you're a little bit lost. And for me, it's always coming back to basics. I find I am an introvert. So oftentimes this happens when I'm doing a lot of traveling or being, around a lot of large groups of people. And I just need to take time for myself and go back to a routine that I know works for me, the basics of getting enough sleep and, doing my morning routine and exercising and eating well. And for me, a big part has been spending more time outside, connecting with nature. That's always, very grounding thing to do.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it looks like stepping back and reflecting. I think my introvert side, like there are times where I've really taken, especially when I've really needed to get to my own kind of understanding or truth on something, where I've really taken time away, whether it's fasting, whether it's going away and, staying by myself for a weekend and just doing a lot of introspection or writing or journaling. Like those are all tools that I use a lot, sometimes in small amounts, like doing it for a few minutes in the morning. Sometimes I do, a whole weekend, if I really need to connect. And then there's also a lot of value, I think, in connecting with those people who know you the best. And when you're feeling lost, like having them reflect a bit back to what they know about you, that's always been something that's been grounding for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That sounds like a page out of my introverted playbook as well.
Totally. And just finding a system. What also has been really good for me is like really honing systems that help me feel organized, because there was a long time where I was all over the place and I have to-do lists and sticky notes and all these different things. And I underestimated how much just taking some time to really develop a system for myself that I can keep going back to. And when I'm kind of organized in that system, it's like everything else feels okay. Like I feel like, okay, I know where everything is. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. That is very grounding for me too.
Well, that's cool. So where did you go from sticky notes to system? When you say system, that
Well,
entails.
interesting. I read a book called Getting Things Done by David Allen, which is a very old book. And he, it's kind of old school. Like he uses a lot of paper files and things to organize. But I took a lot of concepts from that. And I actually worked for a short time. I worked with this woman who does consulting through his system, through his book. Her name is Martha Ringer, and she's just this lovely lady. And then I sort of took those things and the things that really made sense to me and just combined them into a system that was a little more electronic. So for me, it's like Google Calendar and my email, and I use Asana a little bit, but it's pretty simple now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the simple things, basics. Yeah.
Right.
It's amazing how grounding they are and how we can take them for granted to the point where we don't realize, like they're actually the foundation for everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
And knowing yourself, like I'm a person who it's hard for me to see the big picture unless I have all the details accounted for, because I'm such a detailed person that like until I kind of make sense of all those, it's hard for me to zoom out and be like, oh, this is what's going on up here, which is not the case. Other people see things very differently.
Yeah. No, it's true. Okay. This is a good one. I'm very curious about this too. Very curious to know what your thoughts are on GLP-1s. As I'm sure you're aware, they're very popular right now. I'm more curious if they are absolutely medically necessary in some cases, or if they're trying to be used as a substitute for good diet and exercise. And then also, if you know about the mechanisms of how they function, that would be great to hear about too.
So this is a big question. And I contemplated whether or not to include this here or whether it's kind of worth an entire episode, which maybe I will do at some point in the future. But I think it brings up, it brings up maybe a segue to talk about some bigger picture things that I've been thinking about lately too. And even how coming back to the beginning of how I've evolved a bit. And so just going back to the basics about, the mechanisms and what these medications are, the GLP-1 agonists, which are things like Ozempic that I'm sure most people are aware of now, that have been around for a while as medications for diabetes and more recently have become more popular for weight loss as well and have been approved. Some of the medications have been approved for use for weight loss specifically. And so the medications act, they stimulate a very normal physiological process, which is there are these little hormones that are released. So when we eat food, the food passes through our gut. It stimulates the release of these, what are called incretin hormones, these little proteins. And they bind to receptors in our gut. And they signal, because there's food coming in, they signal a few things to happen. They signal for insulin to be released so that blood sugar can then be brought into our cells. They decrease glucagon secretion so that we have less blood sugar being released from the liver. They also start to slow our digestion. Again, kind of slowing that blood sugar entry into the bloodstream. And then they also signal our brain to decrease our appetite, to signal satiety that we're getting full and decrease appetite. So this is a very normal process that happens every time that we eat. And these drugs basically activate that GLP-1 receptor and sort of overactivate this process. And so talking about, the first question about, are they absolutely medically necessary in some cases? So I don't know if anything is absolutely medically necessary. As I said, it's a diabetes medication. So there are many medications that can be used for treating diabetes. This is one. There are certain contraindications. So there are some people who really should never be using these medications because they have some significant side effects, the most common being GI. So because they're slowing the digestion, especially people who've had gastric bypass or people who are prone to pancreatitis. I've had several patients who've taken them who've had really significant nausea and vomiting, and that has prevented them from continuing. But they also have in some of their animal studies, they've been known to cause things like thyroid cancer. So people who have personal or family history of certain thyroid cancers also should not be taking these. So like every drug, right? There's side effects, there's contraindications. That being said, I think it opens up a much wider conversation about like the purpose for these drugs. And like everything, just like you mentioned when we were talking about energy drinks, right? There is a lot of individualization to these decisions. And so, for someone with diabetes who has out of control blood sugar and needs a drug to help control their blood sugars in the meantime, while hopefully they're also doing, exercise and changes to their nutrition and hopefully reversing that diabetes and not needing it long term, I think that, it has a great level of effectiveness and can also reduce, can provide some weight loss in those patients. I think as a weight loss specific drug, there's a few concerns. The main one, aside from the contraindications that I mentioned earlier, is that when we see people lose weight on these drugs, a good amount of that weight is actually lean body mass. So things like muscle and bone and, body mass that we actually really want to maintain for our health. And so the concerns that I have are if somebody is taking one of these drugs and they're not, especially if they're not doing a lot of weight-bearing exercise and eating plenty of protein to maintain that lean body mass, that there may be more harm than good, or we may be losing some of those, important, organs like our muscle. And then the other question is, do we need to be on these? We see when people are on these drugs, are they on them for the long term to maintain their weight loss, right? Oftentimes when they come off these drugs, there is some weight regain, even if there isn't a huge change in their lifestyle. And so that's the other concern that I have about them. As any drug. So I think when we think about kind of zooming back out to look at like metabolic syndrome as a whole, we think about metabolic syndrome is this process that's happening, kind of like we were talking about earlier, this underlying inflammation, this process that's happening of disease on a cellular level. And from a macro level, when we're looking at someone clinically, we have a few different markers to say, hey, we think there's metabolic syndrome going on. We look at their blood pressure, we look at their cholesterol, we look at their weight, we look at their blood sugar. And those are all little windows to say, hey, something's not quite right here. And thinking about, okay, when do we use medications? How do we use medications and lifestyle, right? I think that the best case scenario for anyone who wants to really address this and get to the root cause is let's work on the lifestyle stuff and let's exercise and let's do CrossFit and let's eat whole foods and all of those things, sleep well. And we know that when we do those things, many times we can reverse the whole process. It is often more complicated than that. So sometimes there are people who are doing all of those things and they're still struggling with extra weight or they're still struggling with diabetes. And so it sometimes is more complicated. And sometimes these processes are also really advanced. So someone who has a significantly elevated blood pressure, like there is a reason to be on a blood pressure medicine in the short term so that we're not exposing our blood vessels to high stresses and contributing to long-term damage. But ultimately, hopefully it's not a long-term need, right? Hopefully once we get that under control, we don't need the medication long-term. And I think that we can think about weight in a similar way. The unfortunate thing is that when we think about metabolic syndrome, the things like cholesterol and blood pressure and blood sugar are not things that other people see on the outside, that people, when you're walking around, nobody knows that those things are happening. With weight, it's a very external thing. And there is so much shame and stigma that comes with that as a marker of metabolic health, which is unfortunate. And so I think all of these things have to be weighed carefully. And I think that, there is potentially a time and place for these medications to be used for weight loss for a specific reason, weighing the risks and benefits, understanding what they all are and accepting those. I think with all of these medications, though, the problem comes when we think that that's solving the problem. Right. When we think that, being on this medication is making me healthier. All my numbers look good, so I must be healthy. When in fact, there's still this underlying metabolic dysfunction that hasn't been addressed that still requires the lifestyle to address it. And I think with weight too, and with metabolic syndrome in general, there is, like, as we were talking about earlier, the mental emotional side is also a really big part of it. Like sometimes it could be an overeating that is really an addictive behavior that's being driven by, past history, past trauma. Sometimes it's not overeating. Sometimes it's people who are actually really dramatically restricting their calories and they're still overweight, but it's because of an overactivated stress response, like we've been talking about before, that comes from some, childhood trauma or something, that's deeper seated. And unless we address all of these underlying issues, I think that the medications can play some role, and I'm always an advocate of let's get to the root cause. I also recognize not all my patients are like that. Everyone's different and everyone has to do sort of what they're ready for and what makes sense to them. And these are all just different tools that we can use. I do think they're being quite widely prescribed for weight loss, especially, when I have concerns. I have a patient who's on it who has pretty significant diabetes, and he's actually not able to get it anymore because it's not available, because there's so much, it's being so used for weight loss that sometimes people who need it most actually don't have access anymore.
I didn't know that.
So that was my long rant.
Yeah, I might, would you always, and so now I know always because you did caveat with everybody's different, right? And so I would imagine the sensitivity to the individual. But, let's say, granted, time and place, and this idea that we wouldn't, if there's any way possible, that we wouldn't want somebody on these for the long term, or right. So would you always use these or try to use these in conjunction with lifestyle interventions or recommendations around lifestyle intervention, so that way, and actually also maybe even, talk therapy or something like that, right? Just addressing holistically. And then with, like, it reminds me a little bit of, again, maybe not in extreme severe cases of depression, or right, and where a person may go on an antidepressant. And actually my brother was a bit of a victim of this, where he was seeing a psychiatrist who didn't really do much talk therapy with him, but just would sort of continually tweak his medications. As a young person, and never really recommended talk therapy, or any
Totally.
kind of behavior change that may enable healing, right? Addressing root cause and kind of enable healing. And so just reminds me of that. And it sounds like that's what you're recommending.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's such a great analogy. I was thinking about that earlier as well, the depression, because there's like the antidepressants are a really powerful tool, an important tool. And, there are times where they can be really impactful. I actually, when I was in medical school, there was a period of a few months where I was so unable to function as far as my emotions being so strong that I was on an antidepressant for several months, because it allowed me to function in my life and like take my board exams and move forward. It wasn't something I wanted to be on long term. And I remember having a lot of like guilt and judgment of myself for even being on a medication like that, which I think a lot of people struggle with. But it's a tool, right? It can help turn down the intensity of what you're going through. And then when you're ready to step back and really work on the root cause, then you can.
Right.
And so I think medications can be powerful for that, for when they're used with that mindset, right? Like this is a short-term thing for a certain purpose, but it is not the end point. And I think that's the same with these drugs. But the concern I have here is, right, a lot of people do experience weight regain when they come off of it.
Yeah.
And we also don't know, I mean, they're still relatively new in the grand scheme of things. So we don't know over the course of a lifetime what impact that might have. And I think critical for these is the lifestyle intervention first. And if the results are not coming with the lifestyle intervention and someone really wants to go this route and there's no contraindications, then I think really close monitoring of body composition is important, because we want to make sure we're not losing lean body mass and eating enough protein, doing the resistance exercise, like those things are critical for being on these in my viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We are going to wrap this up with your listeners wanted you to answer the same 3 questions that you ask your guests. And
So
so
fun. Put me on
we
the
can do a
spot.
shotgun round of this to wrap it up.
Perfect.
And okay, the first one, yeah, I'm sure you know these by heart, but what are the 3 things you do on a regular basis that have the biggest impact on your health?
Yes. So I think I have answered this in one previous Q&A episode many years ago, and I'm sure my answers are different now. So I would say number 1 is, I would say prayer. And I think for me, what that represents is this surrendering to a higher power, to something that is bigger than me, that is ultimately in control. So recognizing that like I'm relinquishing control over a lot of what happens in my life, and connecting to a higher sense of purpose. So like realizing that I don't really always know what that is, but that somebody up there has something in mind for me and I'm relinquishing control. I would say number 2 is definitely connecting with people, cultivating relationships. And this is something that has also changed a lot for me. I think back in my days of competition and in medical school, I really did not prioritize relationships as much as I maybe said I knew they were important. My actions were different. And so now relationships for me come above work, above really everything else. And so I just spend a lot of time cultivating that on my romantic relationship, my family, my friends. And that's just something that's very important to me and I find brings me a lot of health and joy. And then third, I'm kind of lumping everything else together in the third, which is lifestyle, because I couldn't really prioritize between exercise and sleep and nutrition and meditation, all of those things. I find all of them are critically important. If I stop doing any one of them, I notice a difference in how I feel. And so sometimes it's adjusting the doses and the frequencies, but they, for me, are all very important in my health.
Now, what is the one thing you think would have a big impact on your health that you're working on or having a hard time implementing?
So this is one, actually, I don't think I mentioned it under sleep, but for me, it is sleep-wake timing. So we know that people who have very consistent sleep times and wake times, like you go to bed and wake up within about 30 minutes, the same 30-minute window every day, have improved recovery, improved long-term health. And I really struggle with that. I'm kind of all over the map as far as my routine. So I would love to be better there.
Okay. Okay, last one. What does a healthy life look like to you?
So this one I think also has probably evolved and just become a little bit more broad, where to me, I think a healthy life looks like being able to fully live out the purpose that I'm here on this earth for, of which I said I don't fully know or understand at this moment, but fully living out that purpose in an uninhibited way. So uninhibited by my physical health, my mental health, that I am just able to fully be myself and express that purpose in the world without any inhibitions.
Yeah. Yes. I love
That's
that.
it.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I mean, I know I said at the beginning, but I have looked up to you for so long and admire everything you do as a leader and as a woman and as someone who has helped shape and mold CrossFit in so many ways over the years. So I'm really grateful for this time together in the conversation. I feel like we could have kept going on a lot of these topics. So maybe we'll have to do it again at some point.
Yeah, me too. And the feeling is absolutely mutual, Julie, in terms of just respect and inspiration. And just thank you so much for asking me to be on and host your 300th episode with you. This was so fun. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes. And thank you to all of the listeners for sticking with me for 300 episodes and evolving with me and going on this journey. And I'm excited to see how it continues to evolve in the future. So thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please consider subscribing and giving it a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does help to get the word out to more people.